I mean, I've done my duty in the coal mines of postmodern philosophy in a way that I eventually decided was not worth the continued effort. But obviously, the work of the
So,
how would you describe, say, the various camps
well,
that are
so
colluding?
there's
Sorry, go on.
so there's Candy D'Angeloism, right? They are both in different ways derivatives of critical race theory, and then there's McKinnonism, right? Which is there's Catherine McKinnonism, and the key point for her is there's a kind of subjectivism of harm that derives from a certain strand of feminism, which sort of like her famous statement is that sexual assault, like rape, is when a woman has sex and feels violated, and so there's this absolute subjectivism there, right? Saying that if the feeling is there, the harm is there. Conversely, Kendiism proceeds from this notion that where there are disparities, there is racism. So it's like totally objective. But in both cases, this kind of totally objective claim that wherever there's wherever sort of a statistician can find disparities, there must be systemic racism. And then on the other hand, this claim that wherever there is a feeling of harm, there is harm that must be kind of acknowledged, recognized, and also disciplined and punished. Both of them sort of leave intent out of the picture, right? And so it's that kind of attempt to collapse, right? Like our traditional ideas of culpability and of this kind of legal idea that like there has to be a guilty mind, right? Like prior to your being culpable and held culpable, is what both of these movements in different ways they kind of tapped out. They reached a point where they saw that they had tapped out what was obtainable, right? Like through our traditional liberal framework. And they saw that like if they wanted to squeeze more, and I'm making air quotes, gains, right, for oppressed groups, they would have to cannibalize those values of free speech and due process and sort of turn them against themselves. And so where I see the ideological succession is we move to this point where there is this turn, right, where it was simply about the extension of what we understood to be forms of recognition, acknowledgement, and onto those who had hitherto been excluded from them. And then there's this recognition that like that actually isn't enough. Like it actually isn't going to bring us the outcomes that we seek. And if we want to get the outcomes we seek, we have to become disciplinary and punitive in ways that we have hesitated to be so up until now. And so there's three parts of it, right? Like there's four parts of it, right? There's Candy D'Angeloism, there is McKinnonism, which kind of in the Title IX system, they built a kind of model repressive apparatus of like, because that repressive apparatus is about sort of like taking claims of harm at face value and treating them as guilt. But they're also about like changing people's understanding of consent and changing their souls, really, right? And so like it's a Foucauldian project, right? It's one that uses Foucault as a guidebook, recognizing the fact that like constituted powers and authorities that make knowledge, can inevitably do kind of create the world, right? And that we can actually like seize hold of them, and we ourselves can be involved in the process of world making. And so how do we get to and then of course it's the postmodern, sort of the various postmodern movements, sort of gender ideology, sort of at the vanguard of all of this, that shows how sort of like simply by screaming at people on Twitter or confronting them in a classroom can get us to the point where we can make a med school professor apologize for using the word pregnant women, right? Like that's a tremendous kind of like apotheosis of one's power, that we're able to kind of like manufacture and conjure out of sheer willfulness and sheer domination of a certain kind of discourse. And then we can actually like seize control of the means, like the administrative means of power,